used to sustain plants, which would produce oxygen for the humans to breathe and food for them to eat. All of this had been the subject matter of science fiction stories and practical experiments for decades. Those experiments had produced mixed results that were now getting a lot of attention from people who understood such things a lot better than Dinah. But she gathered that she had better get used to a low-calorie vegetarian diet and occasional oxygen shortages. Isolated arklets wouldn't survive for long. It didn't matter how good their internal ecosystems were. Things would go wrong, people would get sick, supplies and nutrients would run low, and people would just plain go crazy from being cooped up with the same few individuals. The design of the arklets and of the whole cloud ark system kept changing. One day it was all about being fully distributed, which meant that in the long run there was no central depot, no Izzy, and that all exchanges of material and human resources between arklets would happen through opportunistic docking, meaning that two arklets would agree to come together and connect nose to nose for a time so that food, water, vitamins, or people could be exchanged. This was envisioned as market-driven, without any central command and control mechanism. The next day, a new edict would be handed down to the effect that overall coordination would be handled by a command center on Izzy. The space station would also serve as a central depot for anything that could be stockpiled. The Taurus, or Tauri, since Reese was on track to construct the second one, would be available for rest and recreation. Arklet dwellers going stir-crazy from living in tin cans and suffering loss of bone density from floating around in microgravity would be rotated through and allowed to vacation there. The schemes envisioned by the architects, as Dinah and Ivy started calling them, ping-ponged back and forth between those two extremes, and seemed to reflect the existence of at least two factions. The centralizing faction pointed to the dangers of prolonged zero-G existence as a reason for rotating people through the Taurus. The decentralizers came back a couple of days later with a sketch of the so-called Bolo scheme, wherein a pair of arklets would connect to each other with a long cable and then begin spinning around their common center of mass, creating simulated gravity in each arklet that was stronger and better than what could be achieved in a Taurus. A couple of days after that, the centralizers posted an animated simulation of what would happen when two Bolos ran into each other and got their cables tangled. It was funny, in a kind of slapstick horror way. None of this really mattered in the short term, because even on a hysterically accelerated schedule, it was going to take weeks to design and manufacture even a single arklet. And it would take longer to ramp up the production lines for the giant heavy-lift rockets needed to boost them into space. What Izzy's crew would be seeing in the meantime was a hodgepodge of pre-existing spacecraft, mostly Soyuz capsules, being set up using the existing stock of rockets. These would carry pioneers, whose job would be to build new extensions on Izzy's integrated truss assembly, for docking many arklets at a time, for storing material, and for making it all run. The pioneers would spend most of their time in spacesuits performing EVAs, extravehicular activities, aka spacewalks. There would be something like 100 pioneers all told. They were being trained now, and their spacesuits were being hastily manufactured. But Izzy, in her current form, couldn't support anything like 100 new people. She didn't even have the spacecraft docking ports needed to berth their vehicles when they arrived. So, in order to accommodate the pioneers who would begin arriving in a few weeks, the architects sent up scouts. The qualifications for being a scout seemed to be a shocking level of physical endurance, a complete disregard for mortal danger, and some knowledge of how to exist in a spacesuit. All of them were Russian. There wasn't room for them on the space station. Actually, to be precise, there was plenty of physical space to accommodate them, but the support systems weren't there. The CO2 scrubbers could only handle the output of so many lungs. The entire space station had only 3 toilets, one of which was almost 20 years old. The scouts were going to live most of their time in their spacesuits. This made sense as far as it went, since their mission was to work to exhaustion every day. 16 hours in a spacesuit meant 16 hours that the scout was not imposing a direct burden on Izzy's life support systems. At 0, the total number of functioning spacesuits in the known universe had been something like a dozen. Production had been ramped up since then, but they were still a scarce resource. In its most common form, the Orlan spacesuit used by the Russians could only function independently for a couple of hours, which was fine, since normal people were completely exhausted by that point anyway. Beyond that, its internal reserves were used up, so the scouts would be mostly working on umbilicals. Their suits would be connected to an external life support system by a bundle of plumbing and cables that would supply air and power while taking away waste and excess heat. During the few hours they were allowed to rest, the scouts needed a place to go and to climb out of their spacesuits. Whoever was running things at Roscosmos had pulled up an old idea for an emergency crew rescue device and begun actually producing them. It was called Luke. The word meant onion in Russian. It was pronounced similarly to Luke, but English speakers inevitably started calling it Luck. In the best traditions of Russian technology, Luke was straightforward. Take a cosmonaut, enclose him in a large plastic bag full of air. With any normal plastic bag material, the cosmonaut will suffocate or the bag will pop, because plastic bags aren't strong enough to withstand full atmospheric pressure. So, fill the bag with only as much air as it can handle, some fraction of 1 atmosphere, and then place another bag inside of it. Inflate that bag with air at slightly higher pressure. That's still not enough air to keep a cosmonaut alive. So, put a third bag inside of the second bag and inflate it to a higher pressure yet. Keep repeating, like with Russian nesting dolls, until the innermost bag has enough air pressure to keep the human alive. Then put the cosmonaut inside of that one. All of those layers of translucent plastic gave it an appearance reminiscent of an onion. The scheme had many advantages. It was cheap, simple, and lightweight. Deflated, a Luke could be plated and rolled up for storage in a backpack-sized container. Of course, the oxygen inside the innermost bag would get fouled with carbon dioxide as the occupant breathed, but this could be handled as it usually was on spaceships and submarines, by passing the air over chemicals such as lithium hydroxide that would absorb the CO2. As long as a bit of oxygen was bled in to replace what was being used, the occupant would be fine. Heat produced by the occupant's body would build up in the atmosphere of the innermost bag and become stifling. A cooling system was required. Getting in and out of the Luke could be problematic. The Russians had somehow determined that just about anyone, or at least anyone capable of meeting the physical standards of the cosmonaut program, could force their body through a hole 40 centimeters in diameter. Accordingly, each Luke included a flange, a 40-centimeter ring of fiberglass with both holes spaced around its periphery. All the layers of plastic converged on it, further enhancing its onion-like appearance. This became the onion's cut-off stem. To keep the air from rushing out through that 40-centimeter hole, it was equipped with a stout diaphragm of much thicker plastic that could be put into place after the cosmonaut had climbed inside. So, the general procedure for using the Luke was to unfold the bag and find the flange, then pull it over one's head, squirm through it until the shoulders and pelvis had passed through, draw the feet up inside of it, then find the diaphragm and lock it into place, sealing oneself inside. At this point, the Luke was still a giant wrinkled mass of plastic hanging around the occupant like a sleeping bag. Once the Luke was free in the vacuum of space, it was okay to open the valve that flooded air into its many interstitial layers, whereupon it would expand to the size of a mobile home and drift around aimlessly until a rescue vehicle could get to it. On its outer hatch, the rescue vehicle would need to have an adapter with a bolt pattern made to engage with the holes on the Luke's flange. Once an airtight connection had been made between the Luke and vehicle, The hatch could be opened, the diaphragm removed, and the cosmonaut brought in from the cold. Or, given the difficulties of getting rid of excess thermal energy in space, from the heat. The Orlon suit was built around a hard upper torso, or hut, a rigid shell for containing the wearer's trunk, with connection points for the arms, legs, and helmet. The back of the hut was a door with an airtight gasket around its edge. To put the suit on, you opened that door, threaded your feet down the legs, thrust your hands along its arms and into the attached gloves, and ducked into the helmet. The door was then closed behind you. From that point on, the suit was an independent system. Roscosmos had constructed a number of vestibule modules, this being a newly invented thing that they had cobbled together from existing parts in about 2 weeks. Its purpose was to serve as a jury-rigged bridge connecting Luke to Orlon. The vestibule was barely large enough to accommodate a supine human. At one end was a flange that mated with the 40-centimeter ring on a luke, having slithered feet first from the luke into the vestibule. The cosmonaut had just enough wiggle room to get his feet aimed down the legs of the Orlon suit that was attached to the other end, its door hanging open. Before doing this, however, he would seal off the luke by manually putting its diaphragm into position and bolting it into place with a ratchet wrench. Having donned the Orlon, he could then activate a mechanism built into the vestibule that would close the suit's door behind him. The small amount of residual air in the vestibule would hiss out into space, and the cosmonaut would be free to depart. At the end of the workday, the whole procedure was reversed. Just like a suburban commuter sleeping in a split-level home with his car parked in the garage, the cosmonaut would enjoy a few hours of rest and relaxation, floating around the confines of the luke with his spacesuit docked at the end of the adjoining vestibule. There were a number of catches. Luke, vestibule, and suit formed a closed system. The only way to escape from that system was to successfully don the suit, get the door closed, and spacewalk to an airlock. If anything went wrong that prevented donning the suit and closing the door, rescue was impossible. Or at least, spectacularly improbable. A perforated luke, probably caused by a micrometeoroid, caused a fatality on the second day of the Scout program. After that, the luke vestibule systems were brought forward to huddle in the shelter of Amalthea. The asteroid wouldn't stop all incoming rocks, but it would stop many. Since there was no practical way in or out of the system, the Scouts had to fly up from Baikonur in their spacesuits, pre-attached to their vestibules and loops. This was necessitated anyway by the fact that none of this equipment could be accommodated inside of a normal space capsule. So they had to fly up, crammed, 6 at a time, into cargo containers that were not rated for human use and that had no onboard life support. They were, therefore, living off their spacesuits' internal supplies of air and power from shortly before launch until their arrival at ISS. This journey could not be accomplished in less than 6 hours, and so supplemental air and power had to be delivered to the suits en route. The failure of systems responsible for doing that accounted for 2 fatalities in the first crew of 6 Scouts and 1 fatality in the second crew. The capabilities of the suits were being wildly overstretched by these new mission parameters. And of course the Lukes didn't really have significant life support systems of their own. So everything depended on umbilical lines that linked these contraptions to Zavod modules. Zavod was simply the Russian word for factory. This was another new device that had been cobbled together in 2 weeks from existing technology. As long as the Zavod was supplied with power, water, and a few consumables, it was supposed to keep a cosmonaut alive by scrubbing CO2 out of the air, collecting urine, and removing their body heat. The heat was gotten rid of by freezing water on a surface exposed to the vacuum and then letting it sublimate into space. Failures of Zavod modules accounted for 4 fatalities among the first 3 crews sent up. 2 of these were caused by a bug in the software. subsequently fixed by a patch transmitted up from the ground. One was a leaky hose. The other was never explained, but the fatality was witnessed by Izzy's crew, watching through windows and video feeds, and seemed to match the profile for hyperthermia. The cooling system had failed, and the cosmonaut had lost consciousness and succumbed to heat stroke. After that, they had stopped using the jury-built cooling systems that had shipped up with the Lukes, and simply used Ziploc bags full of ice, delivered daily. None of this even accounted for mishaps that occurred while the scouts were actually working. A damaged umbilical nearly killed a scout on A+0.35, and he was obliged to disconnect himself from his zavode and execute a heroic and perilous move to the nearest airlock, where they got him inside the space station with less than a minute to spare. 2 days later, a scout simply disappeared without explanation, possibly the victim of a micrometeoroid, or even of suicide. So, of the first crew of 6 scouts, 2 were dead on arrival and 1 was killed in the Luke failure the next day. Of the second crew, 1 was dead on arrival. All 6 of the third crew made it to Izzy alive. Of the 14 total survivors, 4 died from Zavode failures, 1 disappeared, and 1 was forced to retire from being a scout and confine his activities to Izzy because of equipment failure. Ivy, being at the top of the org chart, was responsible for all strange and extraordinary decisions. The problems that no one else knew how or was willing to handle. It became her problem to decide what they were going to do with dead people. Oh, there was a procedure. NASA had a procedure for everything. They had long anticipated that an astronaut might die of a heart attack or some mishap during a mission. Since 200 pounds of rotting flesh could not be accommodated inside of the space station where people lived and worked, the general idea was to let them freeze dry in space, and then place them aboard the next Earthbound Soyuz capsule. Only the middle section of the Soyuz, the re-entry module, ever made it back to Earth. The spheroidal orbital module, perched on top of it, was jettisoned before re-entry. Eventually it burned up in the Earth's atmosphere. The customary procedure, therefore, was to pack the orbital module with trash so that it would be burned up as well. Bodies were not trash, of course, but burning them up in the atmosphere seemed as good a way as any to dispose of them. The space-age equivalent of a Viking funeral. The normal up-down cycle of launch and re-entry had, of course, been suspended. Things were supposed to go up, but not come down. Those orbital modules could be preserved and used as habitats or for storing supplies. The trash could be picked over and used again. Bags of fecal material could become fertilizer in hydroponic farms. Ivy made a unilateral decision that they would carve out an exception to that new policy. The deceased were moved into an empty orbital module docked at the truss. This was left open to space so that freeze-drying of the bodies could happen out of sight and out of mind. When it filled up with dead people, they would have some kind of ceremony. The thing would be deorbited, and they would watch in silence as it drew a white-hot streak across the atmosphere below. But it wasn't full quite yet. They had 8 working scouts until such a time as another heavy-lift rocket could be prepared and sent up with a fresh half-dozen. These worked in 15, sometimes 18-hour shifts, divided into 3-hour phases. Each of those phases consisted of 2 hours actual work, followed by an hour of resting in situ, or using the obvious anagram, in suit. Dinah, working in her robot shop, didn't have a direct view of what they were doing, since her window faced away from the truss where they spent all of their time. She could watch their activities on video feeds if she wanted, but she had other things she needed to be doing. After the micrometeoroid Luke incident, Dinah had scored a small victory for Robotdom by putting her flock to work getting the surviving Lukes squared away. Althea was attached to the forward end of Izzy, which, because of its orbital direction, was most exposed to impacts from space junk. In effect, the asteroid had been put there as a sort of battering ram, protecting everything after it from collisions. There was enough space on its aft side that several loops could nestle there, improving their odds of long-term survival as well as cutting down on cosmic ray exposure. Dyna's crew of iron mining robots had been made obsolete, at least for the time being, by her boss's pivot toward frozen water. So when not making tiny critters scurry around on slabs of contraband ice, she had made the older robots useful by getting them to drill holes and anchor some connection points, eye bolts basically, into Amalthea's backside, and then moor the loops to them using cables. This was not a hard and fast mooring system, so at first they tended to drift around and lazily bump into each other like a string of balloons. But after a day or two, they settled into a stable configuration that just happened to block Dinah's view out her window. All she could see now was plastic. She didn't mind. After seeing the risks that the scouts were taking, she didn't mind anything at all. Individual layers of the loop were fairly transparent, but the view was gauzy because the layers were so many. She could make out the form of her neighbor's body, but not see the face. It was definitely a woman. The scouts' shifts overlapped around the clock. The woman outside Dinah's window came back in from her shift every day around what, for Dinah, was the middle of the morning. Dinah could see her clambering laboriously along the surface of Amalthea, using the mooring points, planning each move, avoiding the cables and the umbilicals. She must have been exhausted beyond words. Dinah had once done a 2-hour stint in a spacesuit and been wiped out for a day. Sometimes Dinah would send a grab or a Siwai out to afford the woman an extra handhold when it looked like she needed one. The woman would turn her head and look at Dinah through the glass dome of her helmet and blink her eyes in what Dinah took to be an expression of gratitude. Eventually, she would reach the open portal of her vestibule and go back into it, whereupon, unseen by Dinah, the automatic mechanism would do its thing, locking her suit into its socket, equalizing the pressure, opening the door, and enabling her to extract her head, arms, and body. Finding the ratchet wrench floating at the end of its chain of plastic zip ties, the woman would reach above her head and remove the 24 bolts securing the loop diaphragm onto its flange, carefully rethreading each bolt into its hole so that it wouldn't drift around loose. And then she would finally pull herself through the 40-centimeter porthole into the comparatively spacious environment of the loop. Along the way, she would collect her mail, which was deposited in each vestibule during the occupant's shift. This consisted of food, drink, toiletries, a bag of ice that would turn into water, providing a simple temperature control scheme, bags for disposal of feces, and, in her case, tampons. Because of the roundabout and improvised manner in which things were working now, Dinah did not have a way to communicate with this woman directly, or even to learn her name. This seemed ridiculous, but it was the same general phenomenon that had made it impossible for the firemen to talk to the police officers on 9/11. The scouts were just using different radios with different frequencies, and Dinah didn't have one. By checking biographies on the NASA website and by the process of elimination, she determined that this was Tekla Alexeyevna Ilyushina. She was a test pilot. She had competed in the most recent Olympics as a heptathlete and taken a bronze medal. As such, she might have had glorious career options as a propaganda idol during the old Soviet days. But the recent conservative drift of Russian culture had left few slots available for women in male-dominated professions such as the military or the space program. Consequently, much of her work experience had been outside of Russia, working for privately funded aerospace companies. She had returned a few years ago to become one of 2 active female cosmonauts. Dinah was cynical enough to see politics as the basis of that. In order for Roscosmos to remain on speaking terms with NASA and the European Space Agency, they had to have at least 1 or 2 females qualified to go into space. Tekla was 31. She had been somewhat glammed up for her official cosmonaut photograph, with a stiff, outmoded princess dye hairdo that didn't suit her at all. During the recent Olympics, she had been rated one of the 50 hottest female athletes by a clickbait website, but she was buried in the back of the rankings. Dinah felt her comely, with the high cheekbones, the green eyes, the blonde hair, and all the other attributes one would expect of a Slavic superwoman. But she understood why Tekla had been rated number 48 out of 50. For she had a kind of chilly, strong-jawed look about her that forced the makers of the website to be selective about camera angles and, Dinah suspected, to make some use of Photoshop. The sort of men who would browse that kind of website would find Tekla off-putting in a way they couldn't quite put their finger on. They would be intimidated by the taut chords of her deltoids during a shot put competition. Dinah made a point of not reading any of the comment threads. She already knew what those would say. Tekla had been sent up here to die, and she probably knew it. At the end of each shift, when she squirted through the flange to float free in the milky plastic bubble of the Luke, she would peel off the fluid-cooling garment that she wore against her skin all day long. This was made of stretchy blue mesh with plastic tubing stitched between its layers. It had no effect until it was plugged into a pump that circulated cool water through the tubes. Tekla must have hated it after 16 hours, and so it came off first. Then, feeling her underwear down to her knees, she would deflate and remove the Foley catheter that had been draining her bladder while she'd been at work. She would wipe herself down with pre-moistened towelettes that had been provided in her mail, and stuff those into a refuse bag. It appeared that she had shaved her head, or simply given herself a buzz cut, prior to leaving Earth, so she didn't have to mess with hair. Only then would Tekla open up her packet of emergency rations and begin to eat. This often led to defecation, which she had to handle in the crudest way possible, with a plastic bag and another series of pre-moistened towelettes. All of it went into her refuse bag, which she deposited in her vestibule for collection during her next shift. Then, Tekla would turn off the white LED strip that provided the Luke's only illumination, and sometimes spend a little while gazing at the screen of a tablet computer, before sliding a blindfold over her eyes and falling asleep. Izzy circled the Earth every 92 minutes, passing through a complete day-night cycle each time. And so half the time that Tekla was asleep, Nina could look right out her window and see her suspended there, all but naked, floating in the Luke like a fetus in its bubble of amniotic fluid. Nina watched Tekla go through this routine for about a week, and found it all inordinately distracting. She brought Ivy and later Reese into the chop shop to behold the sleeping Tekla through the window. They talked of Tekla, and emailed each other pictures of Tekla that they had dug up on the internet. "That could be you and me, honey," Nina said to Ivy. "It is us," Ivy said. "It's just a matter of degree." "Do you think we're going to end up like that?" Ivy thought about it and shook her head. "Look, the way she's living isn't sustainable. You think it's a suicide mission? I think it's a gulag," Ivy said. "A little gulag right outside your window. You think she's in some kind of trouble?" "I think we're all in some kind of trouble," Ivy reminded her. "Oh, yeah, I forgot. She's lucky, remember? Meaning that Tekla had at least found a way off the planet." "She doesn't look lucky," Dinah said. "I've never seen anyone so isolated. Does she talk to someone on that tablet? Or is she just surfing?" "I can ask Spencer if you want," Ivy said. "I'm sure he's logging all the packets." Dinah knew that Ivy was only kidding, but she answered, "Nah, she deserves that much privacy at least." Reese's reaction was to become aroused. He was reasonably discreet about it, but the elapsed time between his seeing Tekla and having sex with Dinah was, generously estimating, perhaps half an hour. Not that Reese really needed a lot of help to start his motor, and not that Dinah did either. She'd always known they were going to do it. She'd known this based on the way he smelled, at least when he was not in the middle of being sick. In other times and places, the way he smelled would not have been enough. They'd have dated first or something. There'd have been complications having to do with existing relationships, incompatible lifestyles, fraternization policies. But here, it was just automatic, and it was tremendous. Based on what she was hearing from internet buzz from the ground, it was also pretty universal. The human race might be about to disappear, but not before putting on a 2-year frenzy of recreational sex. Actually, sleeping together was another matter. Race didn't seem to mind it in principle, but it was difficult logistically. Astronauts generally slept in bags that kept them from floating about at random while they were unconscious. The bags were designed for one person. NASA hadn't gotten around to manufacturing 2-person bags yet, so if they felt drowsy afterward, they would improvise, swaddling themselves together with whatever they could cobble up. But it never lasted more than a few minutes. Then he would go back to his duties, and if she felt like a nap, she would climb into a bag that she kept in her shop, sometimes peeking out the window, guiltily, at poor Tekla. One day, after Tekla had left for work, Dinah took one of the chocolate bars she had brought up from Earth, wrote her email address on the wrapper, and handed it off to a grab, which she then put out the airlock. She piloted the grab across Amalthea's surface to the mooring point where Tekla's vestibule was cabled in place, then made it climb along the cable, which was easy, it had an algorithm for that, and climb her into the vestibule, where it took up position and waited, holding the chocolate bar out in a free claw. When Tekla came back at the end of her shift, Dinah got the satisfaction of watching her unwrap the bar and eat the chocolate. She held up one hand and sort of waved through the plastic. Dinah couldn't resolve her facial expression. The grab was still in the vestibule and would remain trapped there until Tekla's next departure. Seeing Tekla float over in that direction, Dinah turned to her computer and switched on the video feed from the grab. She was fascinated to see Tekla's face, clearly resolved, float into the frame. She didn't look that bad. Dinah had been expecting someone who looked like a concentration camp survivor, but she appeared to be getting enough food. Of course, she could not see Dinah, and there was no audio hookup. Since there was no sound in a vacuum, space robots didn't come with microphones or speakers. Tekla was just staring at the grab, impassive, perhaps wondering whether it could see her. Dinah slipped her hand into the data glove, did the thing that made it connect to the grab's free claw, and waved. Tekla's green eyes flicked down in their sockets as she observed this. Still no motion. Dinah was mildly offended. Was the grab not adorably cute in its ugly mechanical way? Was the wave not an amusing gesture? Tekla held up the candy bar wrapper. On it, beneath Dinah's email address, she had written, "No email." What did that mean? That she lacked an email address? That her tablet couldn't receive it? Or was she imploring Dinah not to communicate with her that way? The grab had a headlamp, a high-powered white LED that she could switch on by hitting a key on her keyboard. Dinah turned it on, saw the glow on Tekla's face, the highlights on the lenses of her eyes. Did the Russians even use the same Morse code as Americans? Tekla had to know it. She was a pilot. Dinah made the light flash with the dots and dashes for Morse. Tekla nodded, and Dinah could see her mouth making the word da. Dinah signaled, "Do you need anything?" The faintest trace of a smile came over Tekla's lips. It was not a warm kind of smile, more bemused. She held up what was left of the chocolate bar and pointed to it. Dinah returned. "Tomorrow." Tekla nodded, then she turned away, her buzz-cut blonde hair glinting in the light of the LEDs, and drifted back to the middle of her onion. 5% was how Ivy began began the next meeting in the banana. It was full to capacity. The original 12-person crew of Izzy, the 5 who had come up on the Soyuz on A+0.17, and Igor, the scout who had come in from the cold when his suit had failed. He, Marco, and Gibran had prepped for the meeting by jury-rigging some fans to blow more air through the space so it wouldn't fill up with carbon dioxide. This had prompted Dinah to joke that perhaps all meetings should take place in hermetically sealed rooms, so that they could only go on for so long. No one, with the possible exception of Reese, had seen it as funny. Anyway, the roar of ventilation was even louder than it usually was in space, and so Ivy had to speak up and use her big boss voice. "This is day 37, Ivy went on. "That's 10% of a year. If it's true that we had 2 years from 0 to the hard rain, then we have already burned through 5% of the time during which we can expect to receive any help from Earth. 5% of the time needed to turn this installation into a society and an ecosystem that is sustainable indefinitely." Ivy was standing with her back to the big screen, so she couldn't see the reaction of the architects down below, in some conference room at the other end of the video link. For today's meeting, there were 3 of them. Scott, Sparky, Spaulding, who was still the administrator of NASA, Dr. Pete Starling, the president's science advisor, and Ulrika Eck, a Swedish woman who had worked as a project manager for one of the private commercial space startups until recent events had forced a career change. She was now coordinating the activities of several different space agencies and private companies as they worked on the Cloud Ark. Apparently, she had become the architect-in-chief. Apparently being the key word, since every time Dinah had any contact with the ground, she was reminded of how little she understood of what was happening there. On one level, she was one of the luckiest people in the human race. She was going to get to stay alive. At the same time, she and the others got very little information from the planet and had to piece things together from a jumble of clues. She compared notes on this with Ivy, who had confirmed that even she had little to go on, and what she did here contradicted itself from hour to hour. It had all become criminology. Back in the heyday of the Soviet Union, the only way for Westerners to guess what was going on there was to look at the lineup of dignitaries on Lenin's tomb in the May Day parade, and riddle it out from the seating chart and who shook hands with whom. Now Dinah was doing the same thing with these 3 faces on the screen. Sparky was no use. He'd spent so much time in space that he had developed a kind of 1,000 light-year stare. He was famous for being oblivious to the political side of things. His opposite in that respect was Pete Starling. Pete's job was to mutter scientific explanations into the president's ear. He'd been doing rather a lot of it in the last 37 days. He had a background running big science programs at universities, climbing the ladder from Mankato State to Georgia Tech to Columbia to Harvard in a mere 10 years. Why was he sitting in on this meeting? There was little he could contribute. He must be here as the eyes and ears of JBF. But why should JBF care? No decisions were going to be made here. It was just a status report, a check-in. As soon as Ivy finished her sentence, the corners of Pete's mouth turned down. He looked at Ulrika Eck, a somewhat matronly woman in her late 40s, extremely good at her job, according to Reese. On the high-def video feed, Dinah saw the slightest deflection of her eyes, noticing the turn of Pete Sterling's head, but not exactly acknowledging it. Ulrika clearly didn't like him, but there was a reason she was a well-regarded project manager. "Ivy," she said, "just for clarity, when we speak of this installation, we're using the term in an elastic sense, of necessity." Ivy turned to look at the screen. "Installation probably isn't the right word," she admitted, "since it's not installed anywhere." Pete Starling spoke up. I believe that where Ulrika is going is that the cloud arc is a fluid concept that may paradigm shift beyond recognition as we proceed adaptively through the next 95% of the timeline. Ivy's brow furrowed. Something was going on. Some kind of political tussle down on the ground. It was important to people like Pete. This is not efficient use of time, Fyodor said. I am working to exchange trust to receive pioneers. Fyodor's English was excellent, but when he was annoyed, as he was now, he dropped his articles. I have 8 suits outside, 5 inside, for a lucky number of 13. It had become common to use a form of synecdoche in which suit denoted a person qualified to perform extravehicular activities who is equipped with a spacesuit that still works. Pioneers arrive in 2 weeks. This is still true? Then I need more scouts yesterday, as saying goes. When Fyodor had come up to Izzy 6 months ago, it had been understood as a valedictory mission before getting shunted to an administrator's job at Roscosmos. Not that he hadn't taken his duties seriously, but he always seemed to be taking the long view, perceiving Izzy through the eyes of a future bureaucrat who would need to make it run smoothly until his retirement. That had all changed on Zero, of course. It had changed even more with the Russian invasion. No new rank or title had been bestowed on Fyodor. None was needed. All the Russians just accepted him, implicitly, and without question as their leader. And his manner had changed accordingly. He was scrupulously respectful of Ivy's authority. But there was no question that he was the boss of all things suit-related, and the authority had seemed to make him physically larger and more imposing. His creased face tougher, his voice firmer. Sparky answered him. Fyodor, that fuel pump has been fixed. It was just a bad sensor, so the launch is going off as scheduled. He checked his wristwatch, did a mental calculation. 14 hours from now. 6 hours after that, you'll have your suits. And to the zavods and the vestibules. The things I mentioned. We have had teams of engineers working on those fixes around the clock, Fyodor. I am very worried about door-closing mechanisms. The remainder of the meeting had to do with the pioneers who would start coming up in another 2 weeks, and who would live, for the time being, in rigid or inflatable habitats more accommodating than Luke's. These would be docked along a series of pressurized tubes, little different in principle from the big spiral wound ventilation ducts seen in warehouses, that would ramify outward from attachment points in the truss. Little of it concerned Dinah, and so her attention drifted to her laptop. She had other things she could be working on, and Ivy's reminder about the 5% had not left her in the mood to wool-gather during a long meeting. Most of her work of late had been on ice crawlers, and, as of the most recent shipment, ice tunnelers. But she had resolved that she would not shut down her progress on the iron mining robots. Even if she only spent 15 minutes a day on them, it was better than suspending work altogether. She was afraid that if she ever did that, the entire project would disappear. To that end, she kept a window open in the lower left corner of her screen, showing video from Althea. Mostly the point-of-view cameras of robots that were actually doing things. It was always there in her peripheral vision as she attended to email and scheduling spreadsheets and Gantt charts. And at some point she noticed something that wasn't quite right. A few minutes later she noticed it again and put her other work on hold. She expanded the window and took control of the robot that was transmitting the video. She swiveled its camera around until she had a view of the thing that had been bothering her. It was Tekla, floating in her luke. She was bright blue, which meant that she had donned her cooling garment. That was normal. She did it every day as she got ready for her shift. The next step should have been to squirm feet first through Luke's flange into the vestibule. But she wasn't doing that. She was going back and forth between the vestibule and the middle of the luke. She would go through the flange head first, which was abnormal, and do something for a minute or two. then withdraw into the loop and thumb away on her tablet for a while. She was late. Every other day she'd been in her suit and out on the truss by this time. Dinah wasn't the only person who had become distracted by her laptop. Fyodor, normally not a fan of email and other such modern diversions, was watching his screen too, occasionally making eye contact with the equally distracted Maxine, who kept making a gesture like tugging at an imaginary beard. Something was wrong. What had Fyodor said? I am very worried about door closing mechanisms. He wasn't just saying that in the abstract. He was referring to a specific situation. He was talking about Tekla. Tekla could clamber from her loop, through the vestibule and into her suit, but she couldn't close the door behind her back. She needed the mechanism for that. If it didn't work, then she couldn't seal the suit, and if the suit wasn't sealed, she was trapped inside her OVL, as they had taken to calling the combination of the Orlon suit with the vestibule and the loop. It was not exactly an emergency, but it was bad. In order to get mail, she had to detach her suit from the vestibule, leaving it open for the delivery to be made in her absence. Mail included food, water, ice, and fresh CO2 scrubber canisters. Dinah didn't know how long Tekla could survive without mail, but she doubted it was more than a day. The heat would get her first. They had to figure out some way to get Tekla inside Izzy, and since the OVL was jury-rigged, it didn't have a docking port like a normal spacecraft. There was no hatch, no way of mating to an airlock. She studied Fyodor's face through the rest of the meeting, which went on for another half hour, and began to understand something. He was getting ready to sacrifice Tekla. Ready in the sense of emotionally hardening himself to that reality. Dinah understood no email now. It was simply part of being a scout that you would probably not survive. And if you knew you were going to be sacrificed, it wouldn't help matters to be spamming the scout email list with pleas for help and goodbye messages. Tekla could communicate with Fyodor, and Fyodor only, and that was for a reason. It was a reason that the defenders of Leningrad, Stalingrad, and Moscow would have understood and accepted perfectly well. But it was a little bit out of step with the modern ethos. Correction. With the modern ethos as it had existed during the age of the One Moon. It was perfectly in step with how things were now. Part of her wanted to go and plead with Fyodor to mount a dramatic and heroic rescue mission. There had to be a way to make it happen. They had all seen Apollo 13. They quoted lines of dialogue from it all the time. But she already knew the answer. The pioneers would begin arriving, shiploads of them, in 2 weeks. All of them would die on arrival if the correct preparations had not been made. No time could be spared. More scouts were on the way to replace Tekla. And for once, she was glad that the meeting ran long, that Sparky didn't stick to the agenda, and that Pete Starling exploited it to fill time with more buzzwords. Because an idea was slowly taking shape in her head. She would have to run it by Ivy and Reese, and perhaps Marco. She would want to have Margie Coughlin, the closest thing they had to a doctor, standing by. But she could do it with no help at all from Fyodor or any of the other suits. Fyodor was typing something with his index fingers. She locked her eyes on his face and kept them there until he was finished. He seemed to have detected her gaze on him, because he then looked up and stared straight into her eyes, maintaining a perfect poker face. She stared back. Awareness crept into Fyodor's expression. Awareness that Dinah knew about the problem. Fyodor knew the layout of Izzy better than anyone. He knew where Dinah spent her time, and that Dinah only had to look out her window to see what was going on. She could see him putting this all together in his head. He was expecting her to make some emotional appeal, so it was important for her to stay cool. As soon as she turned on the waterworks, she would lose his respect and his attention. Forever. "Theodore," she said, "I got this." He blinked in surprise, then, after some hesitation, made the tiniest of nods. "Got what?" He sternly asked over the video link. "Am I missing something?" "No," Dinah said. "We are just proceeding adaptively to leverage our core competencies." Based on stats from the 50 Hottest Olympians website, Ivy was a fairly close match for Tekla physically. Tekla was huskier, but Ivy was an inch taller. So the first thing they did was to stuff Ivy into the small airlock that Dinah used for her robots. With her head tucked and her knees drawn up to her chest, she fit into it with room to spare. Dinah took a picture, then appended it to an email message with detailed instructions. Spencer Grindstaff, who, as a young CIA contractor, had cut his teeth hacking into email systems operated by foreign governments, figured out a way to send email to Tekla's tablet by wrapping it in an envelope that made it look like it came from Theodore. Dinah watched Tekla read that email. She looked up from the tablet toward the window, then turned her gaze toward the airlock. Until then, Dinah had worried that Tekla might be losing consciousness, since she hadn't moved in several hours. She guessed that Tekla was trying to conserve oxygen and reduce thermogenesis by moving as little as possible. Dinah zip-tied a high-powered LED light to the inner hatch of the airlock, then closed it. She opened the valve that dumped its air into space, allowing it to fill up with vacuum, and then actuated the lever, a simple mechanical linkage, that flipped the outer hatch open. She could see the white glow of the LED reflecting against the plastic of Tekla's Luke bubble a few meters away, and she saw Tekla's head turn as the light got her attention. Several robots had to act in concert to move Tekla's Luke bubble around until it was pressed against the airlock. This was a somewhat maddening process, like trying to grab an inflated balloon with a pair of needle-nosed pliers. Dinah had been trying to do it with Sidewinders, of which she now had a dozen in operation. A Sidewide could join head to tail with another Sidewide to double its length, and the process could be repeated indefinitely to construct a sort of smart, instrumented tentacle. By planting the tail of one Sidewide against Amalthea, and bolstering the connection by holding it down with a couple of anchored grabs, she was able to make another Sidewide slither up to the first and connect to its head, which was projecting up into space. A third Sidewide climbed up the first two and concatenated itself, and so on, and so forth, building a stalk that reached up from the surface of the asteroid and began to curve around the bubble in which Tekla was imprisoned. So far so good, but the longer the chain grew, the worse it behaved. The Sidewides were constructed like caterpillars, consisting of many identical segments connected by flexible joints. The joints were motorized, and the motors were supposed to follow commands embedded in Dinah's code, and it was all supposed to work in a predictable way. The problem was that each joint had a bit of flexibility, which, as far as Dinah was concerned, was error. Those errors accumulated as the length of the chain grew, so that by the time she had connected three Sidewides together, she found it difficult to know, let alone control, the position of the end of the stalk. And when she tried to apply force by making the chain curve around the slippery, bulgy surface of the loop, matters only got worse. Reese showed up a few hours into the project and watched. He'd be silent for hours, then suddenly ask a question that was strangely off-kilter, and yet showed he was thinking about the problem. "What if you turned all the motors off, and let the whole thing go slack?" he asked. "Aren't you supposed to be building a Taurus?" she demanded, and turned around to give him her best attempt at a killing look. "First, we have to solve this problem," he said gently. She had more to say, but instead she went silent. Reese was clowning around with his necklace again. He was in the habit of wearing a chain around his neck. Nothing fancy or bulky, Just a simple loop of twisted link jewelry chain in stainless steel, which he used as a way to keep thumb drives and other important small objects from floating away. At the moment, though, he had removed all of that stuff, leaving the chain unencumbered, and he had got it spinning around his neck. It had opened up into a broad, undulating oval that didn't touch his neck or collar anywhere, so it was just orbiting around him in free space. Dinah had seen him do this before, typically while bored in meetings. He had learned a few tricks for speeding it up and coaxing it into different shapes by blowing on it with a drinking straw or flicking it with a fingernail. It didn't form a perfect circle as one might expect. The moving train of links could be molded into almost any shape and would stay that way until disturbed. When Dinah turned around and noticed he was doing it again, she was about to roll her eyes and say something like, "For fuck's sake, can't you do anything useful with that brain?" But the look on Reese's face suggested that he was up to something more than just playing around. The chain had been running in an elongated racetrack shape, nearly buzzing his neck on one turn, but he flicked at the straightaways and broadened it into something approaching a circle, then ducked out of it, leaving the loop spinning in midair. "Channeling the wisdom of my ancestors, if you must know," he said. "You had ancestors in zero-G. Alas, no. My great-great-great-great-uncle John Aitken was an eccentric Victorian meteorologist with an even more eccentric hobby, studying the physics of moving chains. Unfortunately for him, he had to do it in his drawing room in Falkirk, where there is, I'm sorry to say, gravity. He had to approximate this sort of thing." Reese nodded at the whirring loop of chain. "By building exceedingly clever machines." "Then he must have been a clever man indeed. Fellow of the Royal Society and friend of Lord Kelvin, since you mentioned it. You see where I'm going? Well, a minute ago you gave me a fat clue by suggesting that I turn off all the motors in the Sci-Fi train. Were I to do that, it would go completely limp and become, for all practical purposes, a length of chain." "Yes," Reese drawled, and poked an index finger up into the chain's path. It caught on his knuckle, hiccuped, and suddenly wrapped around his hand in a chaotic tangle. "That's confidence-inspiring," Dinah said. "Hold on. It turns out that my Uncle John knew a few things, and later on, another chap, named Kucharski, in Berlin, worked on this stuff too." Reese was untangling the chain, looking for its clasp. When he found it, he undid it, converting the chain from a loop into a segment about as long as his arm. Unfortunately, there was gravity in Berlin too, so he had to do stuff like this on tables. "Hold it right there, would you please?" And he got Dinah to pinch the middle of the chain between her fingers, keeping it fixed in space. From there, he drew the two ends back toward himself, forming the chain into a skinny, elongated U. "You can let go now, gently." Dinah released the chain and allowed herself to float back from it. Since Reese had taken on something of the air of a magician in performance, he let go of one of the ends, kept the other grasped between his thumb and index finger. "What happens if I pull?" he asked. "Any predictions?" "The whole thing will move back toward you, I guess." "Let's try it. Hold your finger up, just there." Dinah pointed up and allowed Reese to reach out with his free hand and grasp her gently by the wrist, arranging her hand so that the finger was several inches away from the vertex of the U-shaped bend in the chain. "Here goes nothing," he said, and began to pull the chain toward him, away from Dinah. Contrary to what she'd expected, the bend started to propagate away from Reese and toward Dinah, until finally the free end hurtled around like a whip cracking and made several quick turns around her finger, snaring her. "Gotcha," he said, and began pulling her toward him. "Just like a bullwhip," she observed, unwinding the chain from her finger too late to avoid being drawn into close, cozy contact with Reese. "It is exactly the same physics," he confirmed. "Kucharski called that thing the traveling U-shaped bend. a Knickstelle. It means something like kink place. Chains, whips, and now kinks. I'm learning so much about your Victorian ancestors, Reese. You probably thought this was a new diversion, he said. Oh no, I see your point. Rather than trying to control the Psy-Y chain like a tentacle, all clenching muscles, let it relax and whip around the loop like a smart chain. This little digression into 19th century physics turned out to be one of those one step back, 5 steps forward sort of trades. It was the work of a few minutes to concatenate 4 more Psy-Ys onto the existing chain, then turn off all the motors except a few that she used to fashion a U-shaped bend. Applying tension to one end of it caused the Knickstelle to propagate just as in Reese's demonstration, so that the end of the chain whipped lazily around the entire circumference of the loop. Several attempts were required before the grappler at the end of the chain was able to snag a handhold on the far side, but then the loop was securely captured in the chain's embrace. Grabs could scuttle along it, carrying the ends of cables anchored to other parts of Amalthea, or Izzy, and thus the loop was gradually ensnared in a loose web of hardware that Dinah used to draw it away from the position where it had been anchored, and pull it up snug against the module containing Dinah's shop. As it came closer, the vague nimbus of white light thrown against the loop by the LED in the airlock narrowed and sharpened, and was finally all but snuffed out as the big balloon enveloped the protruding stub of the airlock chamber. The airlock was now poking into the nested layers of the loop like a finger prodding a balloon. Even after the success of the whip-backing gambit, this took most of the day. Reese drifted off as was his habit, though the Mongolian cosmonaut slipped into Dinah's shop, observed silently for a couple of hours, and then began finding ways to make herself useful. She learned how to use the data glove and the mouse and keyboard interface just by watching Dinah, and by the end of the day was piloting grabs around and manipulating sideways like an old hand. Margie Conklin showed up to watch the final preparations. She was an Australian physiologist who had been sent up to Izzy a few months ago to study the effects of spaceflight on human health. Dinah had always found her a little brusque, but maybe that was just an Australian thing. She brought with her a box of medical supplies and surgical equipment. All the astronauts on the ISS had medical training. Dinah and Ivy had done their time working at Houston emergency rooms, stitching up trauma victims and setting bones. But Margie was the best. Not exactly what you signed on for, Dinah said. None of us is getting what we signed on for, Margie observed. With the possible exception of Tekla, said another voice, Ivy's. She was not in Dinah's shop. That was now full with Dinah, Bo, and Margie, but she was in the adjacent scrum. Ivy, you ready to set another record? Dinah asked. Ready to try? Ivy said. This was Q code for the number of women on the space station at one time. The old record had been 4, set in 2010. They had tied it months ago when Margie and Lena had come up to Izzy, joining Ivy and Dinah. They had broken it when Bo had turned up in the Soyuz launch 3 weeks ago. Tekla would make 6, if they could only get her through the airlock. Or the number might drop back if this went wrong. Bo, thanks for helping. You should probably go out with Ivy. Good luck, Bo said, and pushed out from the inner hatch of the airlock, drifted across Dinah's shop and out through the hatch into the scrum, where Ivy hovered waiting. Everything sealed up behind you? Dinah asked, more out of nervousness than anything else. It was out of the question that Ivy would get that wrong. Since the breakup of the moon, they'd intensified their precautions anyway, keeping the various modules of Izzy separated by airtight hatches whenever possible, so that the perforation of one module by a bolide wouldn't lead to the destruction of the whole complex. Ivy didn't answer. You know what to do with that hatch if this all goes sideways, Dinah went on. You talk a lot when you're nervous, Ivy said. I concur, Margie said. Are we going to do this or not? That woman might be asphyxiating out there. Okay. "Giving her the signal now," Dinah said. In the space program that she had dreamed of when she'd been a little girl with the Snoopy the astronaut poster on the ceiling of her shack in the hinterlands of South Africa, or watching live feeds from the space station on satellite TV in Western Australia. The signal would have been a terse utterance into a microphone, or a message struck out on a keyboard. But what she actually did was drift over to her little window and peer through 14 layers of milky, translucent plastic at Tekla, almost close enough to reach out and touch, and give a thumbs up. Tekla nodded and held up a small object next to her head. It was a folding knife with a belt clip and a lanyard, which she had prudently wrapped around her wrist. Using one thumb, she snapped its serrated blade open. Dinah nodded. Tekla nodded back, then drifted out of view, headed toward the airlock. "Here she comes," Dinah said. She had already sized Margie up as a woman of some physical strength. She was stocky, but in a powerful rather than a flabby way. Dinah got a grip on the mechanical linkage that would swing the outer hatch of the airlock closed. "Brace me," she said. She was worried about all that plastic. Shreds of it were certain to get caught in the hatch's delicate seal. The principle was simple enough. She'd run through it in her head 100 times. If Tekla cut a slit a few inches long through the innermost layer of the loop, air would rush out into the space between it and the next layer, which was at a lower pressure. If Tekla put her head and shoulder into that slit, she'd become like a cork in a champagne bottle, and the pressure would try to force her out. If she then cut a slit to the next layer, and the next, and the next, a wave of pressure would build up behind her and spit her out like a watermelon seed. And as long as she kept aiming for the white LED on the airlock's inner hatch, she would be projected into that airlock. At that point, she'd be naked and unprotected in the middle of a jet of air that would be exploding away from her into the vacuum. And at that point, there was a whoosh and a knee bunking impact. "Jesus Christ, I think that was it," Margie said. "She is out?" "No," confirmed. Bill, out in the next compartment, on a tablet on which she was watching a video feed from a nearby grab. "I mean, she is in the airlock." Dinah hauled on the handle, swinging the outer hatch closed. Her body, in accordance with Newton's third law, moved in the opposite direction, stealing her force. But Margie's arms caught her in a bear hug and pushed back. Margie had found a way to brace herself. Bill gasped, "You're smashing her foot!" "Oh shit! Her foot is sticking out!" "Dinah," Ivy said, "you have to open the hatch a little, her foot's caught." Dinah relaxed her arms. What if Tekla was unconscious? What if she was unable to draw herself up into the fetal position they'd shown her in that photograph? The change in Bose in Ivy's tone told her otherwise. "She's in!" Ivy exclaimed. "Close the hatch! Close it!" Bill was shouting. Dinah swung the handle all the way around and snapped it into its locked position. It didn't feel quite right, but at least it was closed. Meanwhile, Margie was actuating the valve that let air into the airlock. This was supposed to be a gradual process, but she just let it go explosively, with a sudden movement of the air that tugged at their diaphragms and popped their ears. "Blood is coming out," Bo said dully, "leaking out of the hatch." "Fuck," Dinah said, because that meant two bad things at once. The outer hatch wasn't really closed, and Tekla was hurt. "Let's get it open," Margie said. In the end, it took all four of them, Dinah, Margie, Bo, and Ivy, all crammed into the space with their fingers under the rim of the hatch, pushing against the wall with all the strength in their legs and their backs to break the seal. Whereupon, air whooshed out of the compartment and the hatch flew open, like when you finally break the seal on a vacuum-packed jar and the lid flies off. Tekla was in there, drawn up into the prescribed fetal position, a solid mass of red. They all stared at her, speechless for a moment. Her head moved, She turned her face up toward them, revealing a huge red smear where an eye ought to have been. The only thing that kept Dinah from screaming like a little girl was the gorge rising up into her throat. Mo drew in a long breath and began muttering something. Tekla's hands unfolded and gripped the rim of the chamber. The lanyard of the knife was still wound around her wrist. The handle of the knife trailed after it. Dinah supposed that its blade had been snapped off, until she understood that the whole thing had become embedded in Tekla's forearm. Tekla pulled herself out a few inches, then stopped. Her head was now projecting into the room. An eye opened, a bloodshot eye and a bloody face, but a normal, working eye. Dinah's ears began working again and she realized that she was hearing a loud hissing noise. It was the sound of air escaping from the International Space Station, not through a huge leak, but through small gaps in the airlock's outer seal. The air was flowing past Tekla's body, creating a vacuum behind her, a vacuum she had to fight in order to advance into the room. She felt embarrassed then, in the manner of a hostess who forgets to properly welcome a guest, and she reached down and grabbed one of Tekla's hands. Margie got the other, and with a final sucking, squelching noise, they dragged Tekla's blood-lubricated form out of the airlock chamber and into the space station. Dinah half-closed the inner hatch of the airlock. The Big Hoover, as old-school astronauts referred to the vacuum of space, took care of the rest, and slammed it closed with frightening violence. They'd lost a measurable percentage of the atmosphere in this module. Not enough to cause oxygen deprivation, but more than enough to set off alarms all over Izzy, and all the way down to Houston. Margie got to work on Tekla's arm, which was bleeding quite a lot, while Ivy and Bo, now blue-gloved, cleaned off her face with towelettes. The picture was getting clearer. The basic idea had worked. Tekla's knife work had been true and well-aimed, and perhaps more effective than was really good for her. She had been spat out of the luke's outermost layer and into the airlock chamber with great force, slamming her face into a metal fitting along the way and opening up big lacerations above and below the eye. These had bled profusely. In the same moment, the blade of her knife had caught on something and turned back on her and then jammed into her forearm. She had lain dazed for a moment, one leg hanging out the open hatch as Dinah had tried to close it on her, then had come to and drawn herself up as planned. For a few moments during all of this, she had been exposed to vacuum, which hadn't done her bleeding wounds any favors. But air had rushed into the lock and equalized the pressure before irreparable damage could be inflicted. As Dinah had worried, scraps of plastic had gotten caught in the outer hatch's gasket, accounting for those hissing air leaks. But most of them drifted off into space when she swung the hatch back open again, and the remaining bits, stuck to the gasket by Tekla's freeze-dried blood, she was able to pick clean using a programmed swarm of gnats. She ended up leaving that project as an exercise for Bo, who was climbing the robot learning curve with remarkable speed. She drifted down the